Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all our audiences, wherever you are. Israel has succeeded in becoming one of the leading innovation ecosystems in the world in absolute terms, but relative to the size of our country, it is definitely the world leader. This ecosystem employs almost 10% of the workforce, accounts for almost 50% of our exports, and approaches 15% of GDP. But how does an average citizen benefit from the existence and the development of this ecosystem in Israel? Does it get him or her better paying jobs, higher tax revenues, more efficient government and the economy? Our session today is devoted to this question. The innovation ecosystem evolved into a separate economy, almost like a zeppelin, only slightly attached to the main economy and society. While being the envy of many countries, its value to Israel is significantly smaller than it could be. Luckily, we're seeing change. More companies in recent years choose to grow in Israel rather than relocate or be sold to a large multinational. We argue that growing tech companies in Israel is the main way to ensure that all citizens benefit. Startup Nation's Central report identifies 3 challenges that are crucial to address to make tech companies grow in Israel. The first one is, how can we make sure that a large pool of local smart capital continuously supports the growth of tech companies while creating high returns for Israeli savers? The second one is, how can these companies access a deep, new, diverse talent pool, creating many more high-paying jobs for disadvantaged parts of Israel? Finally, can we create beta sites for the Israeli tech within our government, healthcare system, and in the local industry, modernizing them in the process, while at the same time allowing the tech companies to test their technologies close to their R&D base before trying to conquer the world? The session today addresses these challenges, as well as other ways of connecting the innovation ecosystem to the rest of the economy and the society through a new social contract. I'm honored to invite Ms. Naomi Krieger Carmy, the head of Societal Challenges Division at the Israeli Innovation Authority, to moderate the session. Naomi, please.
Thank you, Eugene, and welcome to everyone joining us. Today, as Eugene said, we'll be touching on one of the biggest questions around the tech ecosystem in Israel, and we have really some of the best people to discuss this with us today. So before I introduce them, I just want to remind you that, as you know, every session opens with a relevant question poll. Our question for today's session is, should Israel's tech sector enter a new social contract with the rest of society? We'd love to hear what you think, so please go to the poll tab on the right-hand side of the conference platform and cast your vote. Thank you. So with us today are 3 speakers who are going to try to tackle the question that Eugene posed to us, and I'll dive into it a bit more. But first, I'll give you a brief intro about each one of them. Yossi Vardi, Alan Feld, and Shai-Lee Spigelman. Now, as you know, in today's Israel's ecosystem, the indicator for who's who is whether you were in Dubai before the agreement, whether you just got back from Dubai, or whether you're planning your next trip to Dubai. And by this indicator, all 3 of our speakers are definitely at the top level of Israel's tech world. So thank you for making time between your trips to Dubai to join us today. So first we have with us Alan Feld. Alan is the founder and the managing partner of Vintage Investment Partners. It's Israel's leading venture fund of funds, secondary fund, and late-stage co-investment. The firm manages over $2 billion through 12 funds. Alan's also extremely active in a lot of not-for-profit and social initiatives. I'm really just giving the abbreviated version of everyone's bios today, because if I tell you everything they've done, we'll take up the whole panel. But Alan's the founding chairman of Power in Diversity Israel, which is an initiative to add more people from underrepresented communities to the VC and startup labor force, and the founding chairman of Startup Jerusalem. Yossi Vardi, one of Israel's early entrepreneurs and investors. He's co-founded, led, funded, helped build more than 80 companies in diverse sectors. Also extremely active in many other initiatives, chairman of the board of trustees of the Jerusalem Foundation, on the board of trustees of the Technion. He's been an advisor to the World Bank, a member of the World Economic Forum, and I can go on and on. Really an honor to have you with us. And last but not least, Shai-Lee. Thank you. And Shai-Lee Spigelman, the recently appointed Director General of the Ministry of Science and Technology, brings to this role the wealth of her experience both in the private sector, from a career in Microsoft, ending as VP of Marketing, as well as in the public sector, most recently as head of the Israeli National Digital Initiative, known as Digital Israel. So really excited to be discussing with all three of you. And I'll just kind of set the stage and then start turning over to you for some questions. So as Eugene mentioned, one of the biggest questions in Israel is really the relationship between the tech ecosystem and the rest of society. And the tech ecosystem, while it's accounts for over 13% of the GDP, over 40% of Israel's exports, and definitely is a huge source of revenue and income for Israel and the Israeli economy, the question is, how connected is it to the rest of society? We could look at that from an employment perspective. As Eugene mentioned, we're proud that we've moved up to close to 10% of the workforce being employed in high tech, but that still leaves over 90% of the workforce which is not in high tech. So we can look at the employment aspect, how many people and who are in tech. We can look at whether technology itself is being harnessed to improve Israeli society. Do we feel that we're living in Startup Nation in the services that we receive, particularly the public services, in education, in health, in our interaction with government? And what's the interaction between the tech companies and tech individuals, for that matter, between the rest of society on how involved they are in mentoring, in education initiatives, and in many other areas? So at the Israel Innovation Authority, where I come from, we try to take a holistic approach towards the relationship between the tech industry and the rest of society. And maybe we'll talk more about that later. But let's dive in and hear from our panelists. And Yossi, if we could start with you. You've been around for a while in this industry. What do you think? Do you agree with this two economies approach? Is the tech industry really that disconnected from the rest of the economy? And what should we be doing about it?
Yes, I think it was Manuel Trachtenberg who reacted to the common saying that the high-tech is the locomotive which pulled the train of the economy of the country. And he said that this locomotive is running on a parallel tracks and the rest of the train is not connected to it. No doubt that we have done excellent job in building here a thriving high-tech ecosystem from nothing. But as Naomi and Eugene said, only less than 10% of the labor force is engaged by it. The main problem is that because of the success of this 10%, the social gaps and the income gaps between the high-tech sector and the rest of the economy are the highest in OECD. And this is utterly not acceptable from number of reasons. It's not acceptable from economic point of view. It's not acceptable from the utilization of the human capital we have in the country. It's not acceptable from the social point of view, and not only it's not acceptable, it's also not sustainable. The whole thing was aggravated by the corona. If you look today at the market, you see staggering numbers of people who went into enforced leave from the high-tech sector compared to the food and beverage sector, which is the other end of the income scale, while about 1,500 people left the high-tech sector, about 37,000 people left the food and beverage. So we must engage and we must take steps to do it. I will conclude that when the corona started, I was called by some journalists to ask me what kind of support the high-tech sector should get in light of the corona, and I said that the high-tech sector, it shouldn't be the subject of getting support. The high-tech sector should get call for action and should mobilize in order to help to resolve the issues, and there are a lot of things which can be done. I know things are being done. The Innovation Authority is active in a number of things, and Allen is active, and I'm sure that the Ministry of Science, but we have to increase the reach out of the high-tech sector to the other sectors of the economy, not necessarily only in job creation, but job creation and also taking social responsibility.
Okay, thank you, Yossi. And I think you've touched on a really important point, which I'd like to ask Shai-Lee to maybe continue from that. And this is kind of reflecting back on your previous role as leading Digital Israel. So Yossi mentioned really how do we connect technology to other parts of society, and a lot of your work there had to do with how do we bring that advanced technology and digitization into key areas such as education and health and government services. So can you tell us a little bit about that? Has it been succeeding? And how has Corona impacted that? And how has that changed the interaction between Israeli companies and these really important industries?
Okay, that's a very big question. I'll try to summarize. In Israel, there is a gap between the private sector or the high-tech sector and between the public sector, which is not as innovative as startup nation as we want it to be. That's why they established Digital Israel maybe 5 or 6 years ago when I joined, with the notion of how we can help the government and the public sphere in Israel do the leapfrog or the digital transformation is needed. I think there is a lot of progress in this last several years, and I think people really feel it in terms of healthcare and government services and other areas. I feel that we really moved up, and we are much more digital these days. I can give some examples. I think what happened with the Corona is that it actually speed up a lot of processes that were already in place. So it accelerated all the government services that people just understood that they have to do it online, and the government entities understood that they have to provide online services, and a lot of the things really accelerated. Another thing that happened that people realized that everything is digital. For example, doctors. Today, there's no point of having physical meetings with some of the doctors. A lot of the first meetings between patient and doctor could be online, telemedicine. It's more common. We can assess that between 30 and 50% of first encounters with doctor could be online, but it was really hard to convince doctors to change the way they do their work for tens of years or many years. But now with the Corona, everybody in Israel knows that it's really easy to just, everybody moved to the phone or to video conference meetings, and a lot of appointments, doctor appointments, just moved to the virtual world. It took 2 weeks or a month. Things would have took us maybe 2 or 3 years, just accelerated. So I would say that A, we're on the right track. B, there's a lot of things to do. And C, the Corona really helped us that realize that digital is here and it's here to stay, and that's the solution, and we cannot stay behind. The last thing I want to say about it is, and regarding the high-tech industry in Israel and the social contract, because this is a panel, is that I think a few years ago, most of the pilot or the beta sites of Israeli companies were done outside of Israel. So a startup would prefer to do with a hospital in Indiana rather than a hospital in Tel Aviv. But I think it's starting to change, and we see because of a lot of the work that the Innovation Authority is doing, we see a lot of connections and beta sites and pilot programs between Israeli startups in areas of healthcare and digital health and smart cities and other areas when they actually do their pilots with government and Innovation Authority support in the Israeli public sphere. And that would help not only the startups to do their beta sites and hopefully successful pilots, but also help us to be much more innovative in our public sphere. So this is a win-win to both sides, and I think this is a really great progress, a really great infrastructure that is actually now progressing, and hopefully will continue.
Great, thank you. And I just want to make a note to all our panelists, the format is a bit challenging, but let's make this a dynamic discussion. If you want to comment on anything that someone else is saying, just feel free to jump in and add your 2 cents. So if there's anyone who wants to comment on anything that Yossi or Shai-Lee has said so far, jump in. But I'll turn to you next, Alan, and I think that really one of the issues that you've put a lot of emphasis on in recent years is the human capital front of the tech industry. And we know that before the crisis, the tech industry needed people. Startup Nation Central and the Innovation Authority, we put out a joint report indicating the number of positions open. And while the crisis has definitely changed that and reduced some of the demand, we still see this as one of the driving industries, for the future, that will still need jobs, will still need talented people. And yet, at the same time, we're not tapping into all the talent that we have. The composition of the tech workforce is still predominantly male, Jewish, secular, from the center of Israel. And you've really put a lot of focus on this and even started an initiative about increasing diversity in the industry. So if you could tell us a little bit, what you've learned from that, and then also maybe, to press you on that a little bit, with competition so strong globally for really having the most cutting edge talent, how much room is there to continue to bring in, more and more groups into the tech success story?
So, before I actually get into that specific question, with your permission, Naomi, I just want to maybe make a comment on what we heard so far. I think one of the things, and I agree with Shai-Lee, that one of the things that's been important about the whole COVID experience is it's accelerated processes that were happening anyway. And if companies weren't tech companies before, every company now is a tech company. So in other words, it's not only bringing people from very diverse communities into the classic tech sector, it's in tech enabling those communities to participate in other sectors as well. So, the way I look at this is not only bringing the human capital into high tech, classic high tech, as I mentioned, but giving people the skills, and education is an absolutely crucial aspect of that. And education is the great equalizer. And certainly we've got a long way to go, both in the short term and in the long term, to make the education system of this country more effective. With regard to the question you asked, first of all, let me, and I know this may sound like semantics, but I want to start with even the topic that we've got as social contract. I don't even think that's the right topic, and I'll explain why, and you'll see how I get to that conclusion. There's a wonderful book that, if people have not read, I encourage you to read, written by Lord Rabbi Dr. Jonathan Sachs, called The Home We Built Together. And he basically said, look, if you look at the social contract concept, when somebody talks in terms of contract, they say, what do I get from this? What do I give up? What do I get? He said we have to change the dialogue from the Rousseau approach of social contract to social covenant, where the parties are contributing to a common goal. Now, he wrote this book right after the British equivalent of 9/11 and the attack in 2005 on the underground system in the UK. And he was trying to advise, what can we do to try and create a common ethos, common objective in the UK? And I think that social covenant language is extremely applicable to Israel. And I'll explain what I mean by that. First of all, look, in this country, we live separately. The communities live separately. They go to different schools. Not everybody serves in the army, which has been historically a bit of a melting pot, but not everyone, certainly serves in the army. University, you care about your own marks. There's not a collective sense of responsibility. The one place where people can equally contribute to something is in the workforce. In other words, I think the home we built together, and that social covenant, is the workplace. So there are two aspects of this. One is, not only do I believe that getting more and more people into the high tech industry, for the reasons that both Yossi and Shai-Lee said. I mean, there's a huge gap in salaries and compensation between what you see in the high-tech sector and every other sector. So I'd rather move everyone up as much as possible rather than, move people down. And if we want to move people up, obviously education is crucial, but also giving people the opportunity to participate in the high-tech sector is going to be crucial. And as you said, Naomi, very correctly, the high-tech industry is a bastion of white males, white Jewish males for the most part. Now, I think there's two key aspects and two drivers, frankly, to try and make the high-tech industry more diverse. First of all, I think we're going to come up with better products. I mean, we're selling to diverse audiences. We'll come up with far better products if the people actually developing the products understand those audiences better. So the more diverse the teams, the better the quality of the product. And there's, from Harvard and from McKinsey and others, there's tremendous loads of research which evidences that. But I think the second thing is, and this is, frankly, my own personal objective. When you're working in a company again, and you're working toward the success of the company, those employees that you're working with from diverse communities are no longer your enemy; they're your friend from work. And I think that bringing in diverse communities, beside making economic sense, is the right thing to do, because that is what I think is going to, if anything, will bring this country more and more together. But also, frankly, if we're ever going to see peace in this country or in the region, trust and confidence in one another is going to be crucial. And I think the workforce has a huge role to play in that. So not only is it smart business, I think it's extremely important to the country. Now, so with regard to the initiative that you mentioned, what we've attempted to do is there have been two core initiatives. One is Power and Diversity, which you had mentioned, which is something we started together with 35 other venture groups and 120 startups, setting up a policy of diversity in all the companies. And the objective, again, to bring diverse communities in. Now, one of the things that we learned, and I've been dealing with employment from diverse communities now for over 15 years, there's an assumption that if you give people training, they'll automatically be recruited. It just simply isn't true, unfortunately. People tend to recruit people who look like them. And so one of the things that we're attempting to do with the Power and Diversity Initiative is to work closely with management teams of startups, first of all, to show them their own biases, but also to teach them how to recruit people from different communities, how to retain people from different communities, et cetera, and develop them. Because each community and each culture has its own uniqueness, and in certain cases, for those who aren't familiar with those communities, their own challenges. And so that's been, a really key aspect. I think it's not just training people, that's part of the story, but it's actually training employers how to do this right.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Alan. That's, I think, really important. And I want to highlight to anyone hearing us who's involved in similar initiatives that we've also recently launched at the Israel Innovation Authority a new funding channel to fund all sorts of initiatives around bringing more human capital into the tech industry, particularly more diverse human capital. So it's just called the Human Capital Innovation Fund. And we really recognize that, like what you've described, there are a lot of grassroots initiatives that really just need some funding and some fuel to move ahead. And I want to take kind of, you spoke about a really important point, that it's not just, it's on one hand about addressing the root of the problem, education and training, but then it doesn't end there. It also, you have to look at kind of who's holding the gateway to the industry and what are they thinking. And I want to turn back to Yossi and ask, you've been involved in initiatives at the education level, organizations such as Tovanot B'Chinuch, and then you've also been involved in initiatives at a much later stage, supporting entrepreneurs from the Arab community, from the ultra-Orthodox community. If you had to kind of say, where the bigger focus should be, is there a certain stage of the process that you'd point at, or something that you think that is being missed in the efforts of public or private sector?
Okay. I think it's important to understand that getting the Israeli Arabs, getting the ultra-Orthodox, getting people from the periphery who didn't get the right kind of education and the chance in the army, getting all of them into the economy, it's not just an issue of having more access to more potential good labor force. Yes, it's true that we are very short in labor force, and instead of employing, or in addition of employing tens of thousands of capable engineers in East Europe, we can do it at home. I think there is something much bigger, which Alan addressed it in his own word, and this is the nature of the Israeli society. As our President Rivlin said, he liked to say that Israel consists of 4 tribes. And when he speaks about 4 tribes, he speaks about the ultra-Orthodox, the Jewish secular, the Arab Israelis, the Jewish religious. But if you look into the structure of society, the fragmentation is much bigger. Maybe we have 14 tribes, or maybe 40 tribes. And if we want to create here a society which will work in harmony, and I'm not trying to idealize things, but we want to have a society that everybody will be able to find his place, we should realize that on the long term, we will always argue about the narrative. Each tribe or each faction has its own narrative, and each tribe, from his point of view, has the correct narrative. The veterans, the newcomers, the people in the periphery, the people in the center, the ultra-Orthodox, the Arabs, everybody has a narrative, and everybody is convinced that his narrative is correct, and there is no chance to convince somebody that his narrative is not correct, and then my narrative is correct. So how you build the Israeli ethos that everybody agree? I think what we have to do is to agree that, one, we don't have to agree on the narrative, that each one has the right for his own narrative, but we have to agree that all of us have to respect the other person, to advocate his narrative. You know, the ultra-Orthodox, I cannot say that he is wrong and he should work God the way I work God, because I'm totally secular. So I should agree that he is right, as long as he respects my right. And the discussion should be on a joint future. The discussion should be how we function together, how we work together, how we respect each other together, and how, the most important thing, how to benefit the weaker parts of the society together. And helping the weaker parts of the society is not that we are going to do them a favor or that we are charitable people. We have a very strong selfish interest in it if we want to build some kind of a workable structure here. We have to understand that all these weaker parts of the society, which went into forced holiday, and the weak parts went, as I already said, they are doing for all of us something very important. They are raising, with their own means and with their own attention and with their own love, the next generation of Israelis. And all of us have an interest that the next generation of Israel will be educated, capable, motivated, people with value that seek the benefit of the country. We cannot tell them, you go and do it on your own any way you can. We should be mobilized and do it. And if we are doing it, I think that we will fulfill what Alan said. I think this is very important. I think it's more important than creating jobs in the high-tech. Sure, the way to achieve it is through creating jobs, because if you don't create jobs, you cannot provide food for the family. And if you create jobs, you better create jobs which have a good standard of living and good item. But the goal is much bigger. I'm not as eloquent as Rabbi Sachs and even not as Alan Feld, but I think that all these attempts are leading to try to do working society. I would like just to conclude by saying that I was elated to learn that in the Technion now 22% of the students are Arab students, Arab Israelis, 22%, and that the percentage of women is 60% among these students. And this is not only not being done by any affirmative action. On the contrary, these students have to pass examinations in Hebrew because the teaching language in the Technion is Hebrew. So they have even extra load, and this is just the beginning. And I'm sure in 10 years we are going to see more. And the same you see in the ultra Orthodox. You see people from the ultra Orthodox joining the high tech. They come with a very sharp brain, and they are doing great job. And I think this is only the beginning.
Yossi,
and I'm sure that.
Sorry, I think you've given us a very clear call for action, and I want to turn the question over to Shai-Lee, who has started a new role with a lot of energy and has really put this issue kind of on the table as one of the key issues she wants to address. So Shai-Lee, can you give us, help us bring it down to earth? What are 2 or 3 things that you think, concrete initiatives or programs that can be done to really change the map of the future of who is in the STEM professions, who's in the innovation industry?
Yes, first, Naomi, can you hear me well? Because we had some technical issues. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, we hear you. There's a bit of an echo, but we hear you.
Okay, first, great. So first, I would like to say that some of the work we're doing is not only looking at academia, which is extremely important. I hear and I agree and support what Yossi said about the Technion and the progress. You have to start very early. If you want to have more people going into STEM, and if you want to have more people going into science and technology areas of work, you have to start early. You have to start at schools. You have to mobilize or provide role modeling for women or for girls at schools. You have to work with the ultra-Orthodox on math and computer science and things like that, and English, of course. You have to work with Arab communities. You have to work with innovations and innovators and mentors in these societies. So what we're trying to do is start early and let's make sure that we have enough what we call to increase the base of the pyramid. So if we want to increase the base of the pyramid, so more people will go, eventually the top 5% or the top 2% will go to the leading companies. But you want to have a wider base. So you have to bring in women and girls and ultra-Orthodox and Arabs all into this way. So things we're doing like we have future scientist program for girls around the periphery. We're working with first robotics. We're working with people in the Arab community. We're doing a lot of programs that stimulate, doing a lot of things in space. You know that space is an area which creates a lot of attentions in kids, and when you have strong space initiatives like Bereshit was really one of them, but other things we're doing, it stimulates interest both in girls and boys and other communities. So we're doing a lot of things about space Olympics and other things. We have kids in 8 schools building nano satellites, actually building satellites. So we're doing a lot of things to stimulate that that then we're going to, when they're choosing their high school diploma, they'll choose the right, or more will choose science and technology professions. When they go to university, they will choose more high-tech professions, and then that will lead up into both academia research and the high-tech industry. So there's a lot of work going around that. I just want to say another point is that we need to think that most of the professions at the future will be technology. I think Alan mentioned that in his words. We have a new era. Everything is going digital. Even if you'll be, everyone will need to know how to work with robotics and data and read data. And we have to think of not only every marketing person is a digital marketing these days. Every designer is will need to know UI, UX, or digital design. So we have to teach the population the new professions and the new ways to think. So it's not only just the high-tech industry. We have to think on the larger professions and how we provide these digital skills to everyone, because otherwise they will not have jobs in 5 or 10 years. So I think we have to look at the larger picture.
Thank you, Shai-Lee. And I think you've also touched on a really important point that the two issues are interlinked because, for example, we see that a lot with women, that women may be less interested to sign up for electrical engineering, but we see a lot of women signing up for biomedical engineering because connecting the technology to what it's used for and to implementations that can improve society and improve the way that we live, that tends to speak to a lot more women. It tends to speak to a lot of minorities to look at how technology can come back and improve, their society, their community. So it's both a trend in the industry, but then it also goes back and addresses the diversity issue of how do we make the language of technology more attractive to other people than just, your stereotypical geek sitting in front of the screen and enjoying the intellectual challenge.
I want to give you one quick example, short example. I know we are losing time. My daughter is 14 years old, and I want her to learn tech. But when I told her to learn robotics and tech, she said it wasn't interesting. She wasn't into it. But then I said, let's develop an app for Instagram or something that improve your photos, and that was interesting for her. So if you choose the right apps, you can create girls much more interested in tech subjects, and we don't do that well enough so far.
Yeah, look, everyone solves the problems that are most critical to them. That's why we have so many apps to deliver coffee to people in offices, because that was what was bothering the engineers in Silicon Valley, apparently. So I want to actually, touch on this point of, the technology in new areas, what we call sometimes, impact tech, technology in education, technology in digital health, in government uses, and actually to look at it, so Shai-Lee talked about it a little bit from her previous role, but Alan, from your kind of bird's eye view of the industry, are these sectors really growing? Is there more interest from investors and entrepreneurs to be active in the areas that we call impact technology?
Naomi, can I take a brief detour and just add something to what Yossi and Shai-Lee's mentioned?
Absolutely.
We have to, and I guess maybe government is kind of restricted to the supply side of the story, making sure that there are tools for many of these communities to have, the education, the training, etc. But I still believe that we are missing, an important point. I have to tell a story. Sitting on the board of a large foundation which has been supporting Haredi education for quite university and college education in the tech and others and similar spaces for quite some time. And I was looking where the graduates were going, and I noticed that they weren't going to many of the big, well-known named technology companies. So I went to a friend of mine who ran one of these big technology companies, and I said, look, I know you're looking for people. We've got graduates, and some of them already have experience. He said, fabulous, I'm looking for 60 people. Send me your best 10. We sent the 10 best, and not a single one of them was recruited. And what we found was, again, we can give great education to these people, but to a certain extent, we have to educate the employers. We have and it goes to the comment that Yossi made. We have a problem in this country of people, whether you call it an old boys network and maybe the army, but there is a tendency not to recruit people from various communities. Yossi mentioned 22% of the people from the Technion right now come from the Arab community, but yes, less than 3% of the employees in the high-tech community come from the Arab community. We did some research recently, and we looked at how many companies startups were funded that had a woman as a co-founder, and it was less than 3% of the companies. It's not just the education, it's not just the supply of candidates. There needs to be a cultural shift, and I don't know if it's going to come from government, but certainly it should be coming from industry, that says we have to look at people very, very differently in this country than we do today. And education is crucial, but we're going to be educating people and then not recruiting them and not giving them the quality of opportunity that they should have in this country. And we're going to have, that in itself will end up creating social disturbance and other challenges that we'll have in this country. With regard to technology and things that are happening currently and that could maybe close some of the gap, absolutely, I agree. I mean, obviously, things such as digital health. Everybody else in my family, my wife, my brother, my late father, my father-in-law, my brother-in-law, everybody's doctors. I'm sort of the failure of the family. And one of the things that I've seen in this COVID episode has been the importance that digital health has. Now, digital health is an equalizer because people that prefer in areas outside of the main core areas, physical areas, don't have necessarily access to the best physicians. If we make remote care, remote monitoring available right across the society, it could be an equalizer also in many respects. The same thing, by the way, is true for education. Obviously, education over Zoom has got a long way to go. But there's some amazing companies that are like Coursera in the U.S., and I'm hoping we're going to start seeing, innovation around educational technologies more so in Israel, to take what probably everybody's children have experienced as a rather bad experience, trying to study over Zoom and improve it. Again, there too will allow great teachers to be put in front of people in the periphery. So, I think there's a lot of technology that could, frankly, also close gaps. On the area that I deal with, and is my, personal soft spot, of course, diversity. One of the things that we started to see, for example, is technology now allow people to be tested online before you even see the resume. And you can see somebody's technical
bias.
Yeah, exactly. You can see the technical skills before, and then let's go see, not giving that person who's a superstar an interview because they come from a community that has been prejudiced against. That's one area. And one other area that I think that there's a massive community that is just not been participating in the high-tech industry, and it's our loss, and it's the community of the physically challenged. If you look at probably in the 26 years that I've been in this country and been involved in the tech industry, I probably can count on two hands the number of people I met in wheelchairs. We have not done anywhere close to what we need to do to bring people who are physically challenged, whether in their wheelchairs, whether they're blind or they're deaf, into the high-tech industry. We're leaving great minds out of this industry. There's an amazing organization called Access Israel, run by an incredible person called Yuval Wagner, who's trying to do some major changes around that. I hope government, industry, and philanthropy will support it, because I think that is a very important sector that is totally underrepresented and could add an enormous amount to this country and to building this economy.
Great. Alan, I'm sorry, I need to, we're running out of time. I think you've all given us tremendous insight, and I want to kind of conclude, if you can each, we have a really diverse audience listening to us, not just diverse in the aspects that we've been discussing today, gender and background, but we have people from the tech industry, people from government, people from the not-for-profit sector. So if each of you, wants to leave us with one thought, kind of literally 15, 20 seconds of something that you think people should take away and do. So, a real call for action to the people listening to us. What would that be? Shai-Lee, you want to go first?
We have a window of opportunity today with the corona. Let's make lemonade out of this lemon. And the opportunity is with new talent. Israelis and Jews want to come back to Israel. People who thought about relocating to Silicon Valley are now rethinking their thoughts. So we have a potential of having new talent coming back to Israel. We have digital era and digital acceleration, as we mentioned before, due to coronavirus. We have a government that wants, we can all
I'm sorry, Shai-Lee, I need to cut you off.
Sorry.
Yeah, we're really out of time. So I think that we don't even have time for to wrap up from the others. My bad, I apologize. I want to thank all of you. Really, you've given us tremendous insights into this subject, and thank the team at Startup Nation Central for this fantastic discussion. Thank you all, and I'll hand back over to Wendy.
Thank you, Naomi. That was terrific. I want to welcome an additional voice to this conversation. Professor Eyal Shimoni is the CTO and VP Technology of the Strauss Group. Hello, Eyal.
Hi, Wendy.
It's great to have you with us. As we just heard quite a bit about that nexus point between industry and the rest of society. In the case of Israeli high tech, there's really this question about how much the local industries are engaging with earlier stage startups in the ecosystem. What can you share with us about how Strauss engages in that space?
So, first, I think in terms of engaging with innovation, Strauss has many similarities with the Israeli high tech ecosystem. It's part of what we do on an ongoing business, I would say. Product, market innovation, business innovation, and also commitment to society and innovation in these aspects. As far as it goes to the food tech, about 10 years ago, we took the mission of becoming a pioneer in Israeli food tech. We set up a food tech community called Alpha Strauss. We based that community on a notion that we should be a driver of the creation of community rather than being an owner of a community. Collaborated with startup based on non-equity collaborations. And over the past 10 years, we've probably seen thousands of technological opportunities through this channel, but also build a vibrant ecosystem. It started with Alpha Strauss. 2014, 2015, we established the first Israeli food tech incubator, The Kitchen. We support the startups in various ways. Obviously, an incubator is an investment arm, so to speak. But Strauss is supporting these startups also by providing beta site, advice from experts, all the professional, I would say, forces that are in the company. We make them available for startups, whether they are related to our business directly or indirectly, simply by recognizing that by doing that, we nurture an Israeli ecosystem, which is important for us, but also important for the society, which is around us. So it's a kind of a win-win situation for Strauss.
Absolutely agree. And actually, Strauss has made quite a footprint in the local agri and food tech space. It's something that I'm very aware of in the ecosystem here. Tell me, though, what can you reflect in terms of the current situation how does that impact on the way Strauss is interacting with local startups?
Well, I think it colors things rather than really changing things dramatically. The needs are there, the trends are there. So, if we collaborate and invested in startup that are into the alternative protein area or sugar reduction or food safety, we did it before, we probably do that after. What might change a bit is the speed of change. Things can happen faster because of the way we interact, which is strange enough. We do not interact the way we would like to interact with people, which is very Israeli, face-to-face meetings, everybody knows everybody, and we're stepping into a cold and social distance kind of society. But I think at the end, it actually accelerates things. We do things faster. The flying over the ocean is impossible, but it actually became shorter because it's simply Zoom. So we don't travel.
Like we are right now.
Scheduling is easier.
Yeah. Do you think that any of this will carry over into the post-COVID era?
Certainly. I think it's beyond the carryover. I think we've seen acceleration in many aspects of what we do. We've seen acceleration in the digital platform that we're using, the consumer-facing wise, database systems. We've seen acceleration in consumer trends that we thought would take, another 2 to 5 to 10 years, and everything is on a fast forward kind of thing. So the need for solutions that we thought we can, I would not say take the time, but take it on a more gradual phase, we'll simply have to accelerate that. Mm-hmm. So if anything happens, everything will happen probably. Many aspects will happen the way we thought they would happen, but so much faster.
Really interesting. I have to say, what you've shared with us is not only informative but instructive as well. We really appreciate your time, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, I'm pleased to have with us Emmavardaman, who's a Senior Strategic Partnerships Manager at Startup Nation Central, and was the architect of this panel. So thank you for putting together such a compelling conversation about this very rich topic. I have to say, I have two strong takeaways. Just listening to the four of them, really it was the four of them going at this. And it really was Alan, I believe, who said at the beginning that you can't really make a distinction anymore between tech companies and the rest of the economy. Because whoever isn't a tech company, they're sure going to have to learn how to iterate in order to fit into this very new digital age, or what we're calling this new digital equilibrium. So that was the first one, just the sheer permeating role of technology in our lives. And the second one, Emma, is really this sense of this gateway to the tech world or to the tech ecosystem here in Israel, and I'm sure this applies to other countries, needs to be bigger.
Absolutely.
There needs to be many more swaths of society that are able to get trained up at an early enough age so that as they make their decisions about their education, their military service, their career choices, that they have the skills in order to be able to make that decision and go into the tech world. So what we know is that in poll after poll, index after index of the indexes that come out during the course of the year about different innovation ecosystems around the world, that Israel tends to excel. What we learned, though, from listening to these four experts is that there's still some work to be done here in Israel. What can you share with us about what Startup Nation Central is doing in that space?
So first, our main client is the Israeli high-tech sector. We are here to make sure that it will remain a growing element of the Israeli economy. So we are not only connecting Israeli startups to the world, but as well working from within to connect Israeli innovative tech solution with the local industry. with all the technologies that can be found all around Israel.
Okay, that's actually not intuitive, so that's very helpful. Now, we heard each of the four of them talk in different ways about the chronic human capital shortage in Israel. Again, I know this is not exclusive to Israel, but it's a tough topic. It's an ongoing challenge. So what is Startup Nation Central doing to address that?
So one thing we know for sure is that this very strong ecosystem cannot continue to thrive without the human talent necessary to populate all these startups. When you look around to the high-tech industry, you can clearly see that there are two communities which are terribly underrepresented, the ultra-Orthodox and the Israeli Arabs. We have a sister non-profit organization called Scale Up that creates innovative models to address this human capital shortage in the high-tech sector. So it would be boot camps, enriching the curriculum in seminaries for ultra-Orthodox women. What we're doing is that we are upskilling these communities and integrating them into the Israeli workforce, most specifically in the high-tech workforce.
Right.
So it's a win-win.
Absolutely. And from what I understand, this sister organization of Scale Up is actually really representing the needs of the industry. And as Yossi Vardi mentioned, this is not an act of charity. This is representing the needs of the industry. Okay, well, thank you for sharing that. And I wish you Godspeed in this work.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Now, Emma, I know that at the beginning of this session, we asked our audience to participate in a one-question poll, and we did commit to giving them results, so that's what we're going to do right now. I'm just going to remind you what was the question. Should Israel's tech sector enter a new social contract with the rest of society? So here are the results. 54% voted yes, it is in the industry's long-term interest because industry relies on public deliverables such as education, academic research, human capital, etc. Now 40% voted yes, but the government needs to provide strong incentive programs that connect tech with the rest of society. So I think if I just do a quick kind of armchair analysis of that, I think that you're going to always have a good portion of an audience that believes that government needs to be right in there in helping to make this happen. But clearly there's a strong majority that feels that it needs to happen in terms of broadening the access of the community and the role of the tech sector in making that happen.
Yes.
I want to remind everyone who's with us that we will be reconvening in about an hour from now. It's 6 p.m. Israel time and 11 a.m. In Eastern Standard Time for the COVID version of a fireside chat, which will be between Dan Senor and Professor Lawrence Summers. So we hope to see you then.